Hello, and welcome back to the sim. In this video, we're going to talk about axes. How do we go about assigning them in SPAD.next? How do we take them out of Microsoft Flight Sim? And then learning all about the little intricacies and benefits, specifically about how easy it is by using SPAD.next so that when you go from plane to plane, you can reconfigure your devices, which of course can be very helpful when you have multiple different control configurations from, say, a single to a twin, a jet, a turbine. So without ado, let's go ahead and jump back into SPAD.next. So when you load up SPAD.next, of course, we've covered the layout of the UI, and most of the devices that are going to have axes are going to be found in the controls section. So in some cases, you will have the default joystick type layout where you see the buttons and switches as the standard little lamps, and your axes will have your X and Y, basically the generic ones that the device is putting up. Similar when we look at, say, the rudder pedals, I'm going to see that there's a Z axis, and then there's a Y axis, which in the case of the T rudder, this is the left toe brake, and the X axis is the right toe brake. Now, when we go to some other devices, like the TCA-Q engine, here, because SPAD.next has implemented a specific UI for the device, it's not left in a generic state, we actually get a pretty cool UI with the controls, and those controls will even show you where they currently are. Now, with the TCA specifically, because it's a modular system, it's also built in a way so that the left hand and right hand add-ons are in addition to the throttles. And since you can actually have a second set with engine 3 and 4, this is kind of the way it's been implemented, so all the pieces break out. Now for some of the other devices, like the Logitech throttles, which I no longer have, those also have a custom UI, and you see the 3 separate devices. So the easiest thing to do is to obviously click on an axis and then assign events to it. However, what's more important is that we make sure that in Microsoft Flight Sim, first we need to disable the axes, because by default, Microsoft Flight Sim is going to auto map axes to most of these devices. So for everything we want to play with, we need to make sure we go back into Microsoft and make changes. So let's head over and have a look at that. So in the menu, we're going to head into the controls options section. So I have nothing assigned to it, and I created a profile for that. By default, you're going to end up with a profile that has these things mapped. So here, what I needed to do was I came in and I clicked on this item and I deleted it. And what's going to happen is, because these were the default profiles, it's going to first require you to change the profile and give it a new name. And so now that it's made this new one, we can come in. Oh, I think I have to go in here. I have to clear it. I have to validate. Goes away. Right. Come in. Clear the input, validate, and then finally clear the input and validate. And then we want to make sure that we save. So as you can see, we've come in now and we have removed all of these elements. And so here on my flight stick, I have a similar type thing where we've got some things mapped to the axes, like the drone axes, because you can't get those outside of the sim. And again, with my aileron and elevator, just because I haven't spent the time yet in SPAD.next, like you're going to see we did with the rudder pedals. All right, so again, TCA all off, right? So we've disabled everything with the TCA and made sure that we've cleared it all out. So now that we've done that and we've prepped it, we can head on back over to SPAD.neXt and start looking at assignments. When we look at a controller inside of SPAD.neXt, now that we've removed all of the axes out of Microsoft, obviously with a controller like this, it's easy to see what you're moving, click on it, and away you go. Something like the Alpha Yoke or a device that doesn't have a custom UI, you'll see the axes move within their individual sliders. You are able to click on the axis, so we'll click on the axis. Now on the right hand side, yes, you have device settings, which we've covered before about being able to modify device settings, but you're also going to find the axis configuration. So in the axis configuration, there are two options now. One is to calibrate the axis. The other is to edit the response curves. Now with throttles or mixtures or prop, a lot of these we don't need to mess around with the response curve. However, with our rudders and our ailerons and elevators, Microsoft Flight Sim needs a lot of sensitivity reduction compared to other sims like Prepared. So we're going to manipulate those a little bit later. So to calibrate an axis, you click on it and it'll bring up. And so you've got a couple of options, well, 4. You could set up your axis range so you can calibrate the full range of the axis. And to do that, it's actually quite simple. You just start calibration and make sure to move all the way to your full end stops a few times and then just save your calibration. So away you go. You've now calibrated the axis. This TCA uses Hall effect sensors and has a high bit depth, so the resolution on it is quite large. The other thing you've got are dead zones. So if you have a yoke or a joystick that doesn't really center very well, you can add dead zone calibration. You can also add smoothing to the axis if you have a noisy, jittery axis, and same thing with minimum delta. So these are also good for being able to require more data to have passed before it starts to make a change. So basically, again, working with that and dead zone and smoothing, you can take some of those problems of noisy, jittery controls or pots out of the equation. So when we come down to look at adding an event, so now that it's selected, if it's obviously not selected, unselect it, you can't click on anything on the right hand side. So this is all involved in the control assignments. So when we click on the axis, this now becomes available as well. Now we can go to online snippets, which is online configurations of this specific control or this controller, as opposed to profiles, which are for planes. So we're going to click on add event. Now there are two types of axes. Yes, this controller has a button on the throttles. That's for the toga button. And you can add button press, button released events, script events, and button held events. But the axis or the movement, you have custom axes, which we're going to look at because there's a lot in here. You also have standard axes. And in most cases, these are going to work. Even with default aircraft, I can go ahead and, because we're looking at a Cessna 172 here, I can use the throttle without reverser. It has no reverser. And it's very straightforward. We tell it what engine this is to control, because if you only have one throttle, you can map one throttle to multiple engines. In this case, single engine. Then all we're going to do is we're going to move the throttle to the full thrust position. We're going to click set. We're going to move it to our idle position. Now, generally what I like to do in all of these is I actually like to set it just a little off of the full stop. But that way, no matter what, it's going to hit full thrust right around here, and then it'll always get there. It'll never get stuck. And a good example of that is if I come back to the idle and I tap that controller, you can see that there's a little bit of play. And so if I tap it, it can always be slightly off. So I like to pull that just a little ahead of the end stop, set idle there, and then that way whenever I bring it back to idle, it's always going to be in idle, and it's not going to bounce out to be at 1 or 2% throttle. So once I've done that, I can go ahead, click OK, and now when I move the throttle, it will move inside of the sim. So really quick, let's jump in. And so here, now we've got that nice sliding throttle and everything is great. Another way we could have mapped this same throttle would have been using a custom axis. We delete that event and we use a custom axis. So now we get offered a whole bunch of information. And the range definition comes in handy. And in my Airbus mapping tutorial, you could see how we used range definitions to create detents. So using the range definition, you could apply just a region. So if we were going to do a range definition, it works similar to what you saw earlier. So I could intentionally set this as my top, and I could have come back a little bit in the range of the axis, and I could have set it here. Now, because I did a range definition, that's going to be able to be reused, and we would actually be able to rescale that value to a specific range. So rescaling, now it's going to rescale from the range. All axes in Microsoft Flight Sim have a range of 16,383 at the top to minus 16,383 at the bottom. And so this is where you can use a range and then a rescale to pack multiple settings. The other reason why you end up having to use the custom axes sometimes is you're going to find that even when we don't need a rescale or a range definition, but I need this because when we look at the throttle, you're going to find that there is the SimConnect ones, and these are the ones that the standard one is based on. However, in Microsoft Flight Sim, they actually have their own new axes they've added. So there is a MSFS throttle axes set EX, or I assume it means external. And so what I found with this is with other sims, including the Airsoft CRJ, some of the add-ons don't necessarily respect the original SimConnect values and things don't operate correctly. But this isn't able to be assigned via the standard axes. So if we come in and we apply this instead, now we're going to use the axis value. This is the part that's a little confusing. So if we click OK and hit save, because I can't help it. So when I move this axis, what's going to happen right now is it's not really changing. So it's not changing at all. It went to a fixed location. So if I move that in, you'll see it moves out, but it's not really following. So what I did when I said I turned on raw value, I turned it on. Now, We also noticed that the axis was actually going the wrong way as well. So it seems almost by default with SPAD.neXt, almost all the axes are, they sense this the other way. No big deal. We turn on the invert axis. And so now when we move our throttle, we are going to be applying that. So if we want this for some reason to work really well, we're going to come in, we're going to use that rescale value all the way in, all the way out, except that's not idle. Because in the TCA, you have to come over the gate to get all the way down to 0. So now that we understand how that maps and rearranges, so we need this rescale to get it to map into the axis value and work. But this is where we can use that range definition now, similar to the way we were doing the top and idle sets with the standard axes. So what we're going to do here is we're going to do a range definition. And so now we're going to put the throttle all the way to the top, and we are going to hit the set for the 2. Now remember, I talked about this before. You could come back just a little bit to make sure of it, and then you don't have to worry. Now I'm going to come back to the idle location because this has the hump, and I'm fine with that being my idle. And so now what we're going to do, again, I'm going to pull it forward just a bit. I'm going to hit set, so that way I can always get below it. And now that we've done that, it is going to now, in this range of the joystick, it's going to apply the full range of the axis. So when we come back in, now you can see even at the lowest setting, it's at 1%, 0%, 100%, and then all the way back down to our idle. So that is how we can leverage and use the advanced axes. And this can apply to just about anything. So we can use this to manage and control all kinds of axes if something may or may not work. But it's also really useful, as you can see, by creating a bunch of ranges. I created a range from here to here now that is the throttle to idle. Very important to keep in mind that you may have to use throttle axis set external. Throttle axis external 1 is going to be all throttles in the sim. And if it's multi-engine, then you'd use throttle 1 axis set external 1. So I highly recommend, when possible, use this method. It's going to work better with Microsoft Flight Sim long term, just because of the throttle and the fact that some planes do and don't support all the different mappings for throttles through the SimConnect protocol. What else did we do? Well, we assigned mixture. Now, again, mixture for me, I'm applying it in the exact same way. We used the standard axis, and in the standard axes, this has got your throttles, your reversers, your propeller pitch, cowl flaps, toe brakes, flaps, elevator trim, spoilers, ailerons, rudder, and even your elevator. So these work really well. Notice in Microsoft Flight Sim, panning doesn't currently work for views because they didn't implement that in the protocol. They took it away from the old SimConnect values. So same thing with mixture. You can apply it to any number of engines and set your max mixture, hit the set button, set your lower setting, hit the set button, and you are good to go. So now that we've done the mixture, one of the other things that's really nice about SPAD.neXt is you can assign your flaps to VN axis as well. So when we look at the right add-on, there is a flaps axis. And so what we did there was we clicked on add event, standard axis, and we went to the flaps with, you'll see auto detent written in brackets. So when we selected that, now you simply work in the exact same way. Full flaps up, hit the set, come all the way to the bottom, and I hit set for all the way down. And now it's going to automatically detent its way through the settings. Same thing with mapping rudder pedals. Here, this doesn't have a custom GUI, so we've got our 3 axes that show up, which is our toe brakes and our Z-axis for the rudder itself. So with the rudder, we came in and we set our center point. I pushed full left, and I clicked set, and then I pushed full right, and I clicked set. So let's turn that off. We're going to go full left, set it. We're going to go to center. We're going to set it. We're going to go full right. We're going to set it. We're going to let go. We're going to click OK. We're going to click save. And sure enough, this axis is backwards. I've seen this every time. So right and left are backwards. So there's 2 ways to achieve this. One is to lie here, and so we're going to push full left and do that, and then we're going to push full right and do that. And now in the sim, left is left, right is right. Or what I could have done was pushed full left, full right, and we could have flipped the axis. For a toe brake, you simply do a similar type thing. Add event, standard axis, click on it, and you'll see left toe brake. So in our left toe brake, max brake, push my pedal down, hit set. No brake, hit set. Away we go. Same thing for the right toe brake. What we definitely found is when it came to the rudder, I find in Microsoft Flight Sim, especially on the ground or even slightly in the air, the rudder is super sensitive. So here, all we need to do is click on the curve anywhere we like, and we can drag these pieces around. And you can set up multiple points in your curve to create multiple angles and multiple slopes and multiple S-curves. So it's very, very powerful what you can do. And if I use a right click, it will delete the other ones out. Now, this is where I talk about it's still sometimes a little bit easier to do this inside of Microsoft Flight Sim, is because you just use some sliders and it automatically sets it. And so also for trying to do mirrored curves, this though is what you're going to need to do with rudders, ailerons, and elevators if you want to move all of your axes into SPAD.next, which is what I want to do. Every other sim, I had all axes in here. I just got to spend the time. I've done it with the rudder for this video. I'm going to spend the time after this video working on my ailerons and working on my elevators as well. But once you've set up your curve, you apply it, you hit save, and now it's going to do a much better job. We're going to go ahead. We're going to jump into the CJ4. All right, so here we are. We are in the CJ4. We're up and running, and we are good to go. So right away, you're going to see we've definitely got all of our axes nicely mapped. This one was actually really easy. Things just happened to line up really nicely with the working title CJ4. We didn't have to do anything with virtual buttons, and all we did was we used the normal throttle without reverser. And we set our full thrust position, and we set our idle position. And then same thing. We pulled it off the end stop a little bit, set it, so that way we would always be able to get down below the idle thrust barrier. And of course we're using the standard send auto throttle toga, which will set the takeoff go around event for the sim. Same thing here, throttle without reverser. Something similar in we set a position for this notch as the full down, and then that way it auto detented this as the halfway, this is the full, and we ended up with the result that we were looking for. Heading on over to our left side with the spoilers, same thing. We've got a full spoilers, we have a spoilers arm position. However, there is no arm mode in the CJ4, so we just simply have all the spots and then full. So it works out great. Didn't have to do much there. Everything works. And so that's what's really great, is this whole setup can automatically change without me manually going in and changing profiles inside of Microsoft Flight Sim. And I never have to go back into settings and change my throttles to a different profile, right? Mixture has been gotten rid of because mixtures aren't used in a jet. And specifically, you want to steer clear of mixtures because the mixture is actually part of the commands used with the run buttons. So when you're starting up the engine, this run button actually sets mixture rich, and when you're turning off the engines and you're stopping them, it sets the mixtures to lean or to off. So if you've got a mixture control, it's going to mess with your entire start procedure as well. I'd say that's it for this one. As you can see, axes and just clicking on them, assigning the values, it's really easy. But the most important thing is that you want to build these for multiple profiles, and of course make sure you remove them from Microsoft Flight Sim. Alright guys, thanks for watching. As always, have a great day.